This is part 9 of our Learn Lightroom 5 series. And in part 8, it was about split toning, but I mentioned that in part 9 I'd be doing perspective control, straighten up buildings that look like they're falling over and level horizons and stuff like that. But as I looked through my portfolio, I noticed I don't have a lot of shots of buildings. So I'm going to be shooting some buildings over the next few days, and that will be coming up in an upcoming episode. But for this episode, I've had a lot of requests where people want to see how I develop photographs. I've done that in 3, and I've done it in 1, episode 1, episode 3, where I developed photographs. But people still want to see more. So that's what I'm going to do in this episode. I'm going to develop 6 shots. Now I'm going to be going quick. Because all this was covered, what I'm going to be doing was covered in previous videos. So that will just reinforce what you've already learned when you watch those videos. Alright, so I wanted to warn you ahead of time, I'm going to be going kind of quick, and I'm not going to explain every little detail as I go. Before I do that though, if you guys could do me a favor, if you could subscribe to my channel at YouTube and like the videos and comment in the videos, I'd really appreciate it. That would be really cool if you could do that. Okay, let's start with this one here. Again, as I did so many times before, I expose for the highlights. If I would have exposed for the subject here, the bird, it would have been exposed properly, but this would have been all blown out in the back. So expose for the highlights, it drops everything else in shadows. But in doing that, I know I have Lightroom and I could tease out all this detail, and that's what we're going to do now. As I probably do this in 80% of the landscapes I shoot, and even though this is a subject of a bird, it's more of a landscape shot, I guess, in that I turn highlights all the way down, I bring shadows all the way up. Now look at episode 3, I explain it more thoroughly why I do that. I set the white and black point down by holding the Alt or Option key in, and I move the white to the right until I get a little white coming through. Then I back it off a little. The black, I set that black point by holding the Alt or Option key in, moving to the left till I get some blacks coming through. I do this a little further than I do the white. Alright, it's already shaping up. Now what I typically would do probably would be a little more exposure or something, but I'm going to crop it first because I was kind of far away. Now when you go into the crop control, you have these overlays here. As you can see right here, this is called the golden ratio. This is 40, 20, 40. Those are percentages. 40%, 20%, 40%. It's similar to the rule of thirds. If you don't like the golden ratio or whatever it happens to show when you hit the crop tool, hit the O key. And there's the golden spiral if you want to crop it to the golden spiral. Or if you're cropping to print 4x5, 5x7, those would be in landscape proportions. If you want to go in different, I should just hold the Shift key in, hit the O, and you can see it just changes it. So hit the O key again. There's a grid just to make sure you're straightening it properly. Here's the rule of thirds. Everyone's familiar with that. Some people call this the diamond overlay. Just hit it again. There's the triangle overlay. And now we're back to the golden ratio. I kind of like this one. This is the one I use. I want this ugly fence post out of here. So I'm going to crop from the bottom. If I hold the Shift key in when I crop, it will keep my proportions of the photograph. Ideally, I would like his eye to be right here. I'm not going to probably be able to do that, but I can get his eye on this line here, and that's good enough. The other thing I noticed right off is it's kind of looking crooked now. You see if I take that, see this line here now is making the whole shot look like it's not level, even though it really was level. So I go up here to the angle control and I could adjust this to level it off. And you see that grid pops up when I do this to help me level it. And hit enter, and there. That's nice level picture. And now I'll continue on with the processing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring exposure up a little bit now. Just a little bit, I don't know, right around there. Around 2/3 of a stop. I'm going to bring clarity up. Now I found with animals, particularly with birds, you can bring clarity quite a bit. Helps bring out detail in the feathers. I'm going to bring up vibrance a little bit too. I don't typically bring saturation up. I'm not going to now, but I will. I probably will today in one of these photos, but on this one I'm not going to. I'm going to go right down into detail now on this one. So you don't have to do, just because these panels are here doesn't mean you have to use them. You know, in this one I cropped it the way I wanted it. I have exposed the way I want, and now I'm just going to check the detail in these fine feathers of this bird. And you move this preview panel over here to where you want to look, and I want these feathers up in here to be as crisp and clear as possible. Now, episode 5 is all about sharpening and noise reduction. You could check that out. But right now I'm just going to move these sliders till I feel that it's getting sharp without introducing too much noise. The radius now, because it's fine feathers, I'm actually going to bring the radius down, and I'm going to bring detail up a little bit. Now I'm going to mask out this background. I don't want the background sharpened, so I'm going to hold the Alt key in when I adjust the masking control. The whole screen is white. What is white is what is being sharpened. What is black is not being sharpened. So now I'm not going to sharpen that background. So mask around 41 is good. Come back in on detail. There's a little noise in the photograph, so I'm going to go to the luminance noise reduction and move it to the right. Again, check out episode 5. I go into these sliders in a lot more detail. And right around there looks good. It's so typical of around 70, around 40. I mentioned many times in the videos. If you just want to do this quick, put your sharpening around 70 and your luminance noise reduction around 40, and you're done. Don't worry about it. And that's where I basically ended up with this photograph here. Next thing I do is I like to add a vignette. A vignette draws the viewer's attention towards the center of the photograph. And that's that. So pretty heavy vignette on this shot. And that's it. And I'm going to hit the backslash key. That's where we started, and that's where we are. So we made look like a horrible, unusable shot into a decent shot. And we'll go on to the next one. We got another bird. And we're going to go up to the basic panel. And this one here, I still do the same. I'm going to bring highlights down. I'm going to bring shadows up. I'm going to set my white point by holding the Alt key, Option key, Alt or Option key, and moving to the right till I get some whites coming through. And the black key, black point, I'm sorry, same way, hold the Alt or Option in, move to the left. Again, I know I'm going quick, but check out episode 3, episode 1, all of those I go into more detail. Alright, it's coming along a little bit. Now I'm going to add a lot of clarity. It's a bird with feathers, you can add a lot of clarity. And I'm going to add some vibrance to make his colors pop a little more. And what's going to make them even more, because there's so many different colors here and darks and lights, is the contrast. So I'm going to bring contrast up and I'll make them pop even more. And I'd say the basic panel is done. I don't need to do anything else in these other panels until I get down to detail. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to try to bring out as much detail in those feathers as I can without bringing in a lot of noise. And no, I'm not explaining what I'm doing, but as I mentioned, I'm just showing you my workflow as fast as I could go, because I'd rather be out snapping shots. I don't want to be here developing shots. But check out episode 5 for the noise reduction and sharpening panel. Lens corrections, I always enable profile corrections, corrects for any distortion my lens added, and it even brightened it up a little bit. Chromatic aberration, which probably isn't any in here, but it doesn't hurt to add it. And then, as I usually do, I want to draw everyone's attention towards the center, so I add a vignette. And I'll hit the backslash key, and that's where we started. That's right out of the camera, the raw file, and that's where we ended up. And not bad. Came along pretty good. And we'll go to another one. Here's a butterfly. Starting the basic panel now. In this one here, I'm not going to bring shadows all the way up, because I don't want this background. I don't want people to see the background. I want that to just be dark. But I'm going to, and actually, as I recall this butterfly, this white part was a little whiter, especially around the tips of its wings was really a bright white. So I'm going to bring the highlights up, not down, to bring out that white a little better. And I'm going to bring shadows up just a little so I could see some more detail in the wings. This dark area of the wings, I want to see that detail. Now I'm going to set my white and black point like I normally do by holding the Alt or Option key down and move to the right. And I'm going to do it similarly for the backs, move to the left. And I have that set. Now I'm going to add a lot of clarity because it's an animal and you could get away with clarity. You don't want to do clarity on a portrait. Check out episode 7. I process a portrait with Lightroom, and I explain that a little better. I'm going to bring in a little vibrance, and I mentioned this in previous videos. Vibrance increases the intensity of the colors that aren't already near saturation, whereas saturation will increase the intensity of every color equally. So I'm going to bring up vibrance, or saturation, excuse me, just a little bit too. And now I'm done with the basic panel. Now I'm going to jump right into detail. I'm going to zoom in to 1:1, and you can see this little like grid pattern in the wings. I want to sharpen that. I want to bring that even more to the forefront. So I'm going to increase sharpening. I'm looking at these hairs over here too. If I could move my preview panel, I'd have to move this quite a bit. You could see these hairs here. You could see them here though. So I'm trying to make everything as sharp as possible. Look at that, I got it all the way near 100, and there really isn't any noise. Tiny bit of noise up in here, but I'm going to mask that out. I could bring the radius down because that's the number of pixels wide that are being sharpened. I'm going to bring it down to about 0.6 because we have all this really fine detail in here, and I'm going to increase the detail a little bit too. That even makes it, you know, even that more crisp. Again, that's episode 5. Check that out. I explain this a lot better. Hold the Alt or Option key down to mask. I'm going to mask out that background like that. And there's really no noise. I'm not going to add any noise reduction, as I mentioned before. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to use it. I am going to go to my lens corrections and do those as normal. Then jump down to effects, and we're going to add that vignette that I always add. And that's it. It even darkened this leaf a little bit, made the subject that much more prominent in the photograph. And I'll hit the backslash key, and that's where we are, kind of a drab, but still colorful, to that. Made it just bam, there it is. Beautiful shot. Go on to this lighthouse. Again, I exposed for the highlights. So if I would have exposed so this lighthouse was properly exposed, that blue sky would have been all blown out. So exposed for the highlights. We could always adjust it in Lightroom. So I am going to bring the shadows all the way down, or excuse me, the highlights all the way down and the shadows all the way up. And I'm going to adjust my white point like I always do. Hold the Alt or Option key in, move to the right. Yeah, moving quite a bit. There they are, starting to creep in from the left. And then we're going to bring the blacks down. Didn't have to bring those too far. We have a really black part up this upper part of the tower. Okay, even with those adjusted, it's a tiny bit dark. I'm just going to tweak my exposure up just a little bit. I try to get the exposure as close as possible in the camera. But this shot, it was such a big contrast of darkness to lightness that it was difficult to do. And this was probably shot at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and the sun was pretty high in the sky, you know, shooting over this way. So cast, you know, a big shadow over here. So we're going to bring clarity up again, like I typically do in the 30s. We're going to add a little vibrance because it's a pretty drab shot when you look at it. And the vibrance, I'm going to even add a little saturation. See what that looks like. Yeah, just a tiny bit. And we have a good contrast here. We have 2 things. I have articles on my website. One, I think it was called Beyond Basic Composition, where you could look to add different elements into your shot which enhance the shot. In this instance, we have a soft, feathery sky, and we have this hard, rocky structure. So there's a contrast to texture. Then we have color. We have a blue sky, and we have, which is cool, and we have this warm orange yellow side of the building that is warm, and that's a good contrast to color. So you try to add those in your photography. And now I'm going to try to enhance this in Lightroom. So I'm going to enhance the color. I'm going to go to the HSL pattern. I'm going to go to saturation, and I want my blue more intense. So I'm going to bring blue up. I'm going to bring orange up. And I'm going to bring yellow up. Then I'm going to go to luminance, and I'm going to go right to blue, and I'm going to make it darker. I want the sky darker. And I'm going to bring the yellow down a little bit, the orange down a little bit. Now we have more intense colors. Adds to the photograph. Now at this point, it darkened it a little bit. So I'm going to go back into the exposure adjustment in the basic panel, and I'm going to bring exposure up a touch. Because just making that sky dark and everything else, it just made it a little too dark. And I'm going to go to lens corrections and enable. Well, before I do that, I should add detail. Try to do the lens corrections later in the process, because I've found if you do it early in your flow, in your workflow, everything else seems to lag when you move the sliders. So just try to do that as late as possible in the process that you can. Now we have this is kind of a noisy shot to begin with. I don't know what I shot at, but I hit the I key. I come up with information, and I used 100 ISO. It was at f of 22 though, so it's not the best shot in the world. But I picked it so I could demonstrate how a dark picture like this, you could, with a real bright side and a real dark side, you could still make it a decent shot in Lightroom. So I want to make the bricks a little sharper. It is going to introduce some more noise though. So I'm going to move it to the right until the bricks start looking like they're getting sharp and they start getting noise. So then I'm going to back it down. It's right around 70 as usual. The radius will find details. I'm not even going to mess with those. I am going to mask it though. I'm going to zoom back out, and I don't want that sky sharpened at all. So I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key in and move it until I don't get any sharpening in the sky, or minimal sharpening in the sky. And then I'm going to add noise reduction. And this, I mentioned in previous videos, lags. So don't just go swinging it up and you don't see nothing. You swing it up higher, because it just takes a while to render. So right around 44 looks good. It got rid of most of the noise. And finally, I do the lens corrections, which I almost did a second ago. Enable the profile corrections and chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration is introduced from your lens, and you'll see it mostly when you have a straight edge. Horizontal, vertical, doesn't matter. You'll get a little like green glow or a little purple glow on it, and remove chromatic aberration will help remove that. Done with that, we're going to add a vignette like I typically do. And this shot is done. So I'm going to hit the backslash key. That's where we are. I mean, you look at that in the camera and go, oh man, I ruined that shot. But no, you did rescue it in Lightroom. It looks pretty cool. I could straighten it, but I'm not going to, because I kind of like it crooked. It's kind of an imposing structure jutting out. It just looks better crooked to me. But to each his own. If you wanted to straighten it, by all means straighten it. Let's go on to the next shot. This next shot, you got a little preview, is a shot I actually sold a lot of prints of. A very popular shot of mine. You'll look at it here and you'll go, why? But you'll see in a minute. We could tease out all these colors in Lightroom and make it look pretty cool. So as I normally do, is I'm going to move highlights all the way down and shadows all the way up. And I'm going to adjust the white in black point by holding the Alt or Option key down and moving the whites till I get some white coming through, and moving the blacks down until I get some blacks. I usually bring the blacks a little further. I'm going to bring brightness, or I should say exposure, up just a little bit, like about a third of a stop. I'm not going to even add any. Well, maybe we'll add a little clarity. And we're going to add some vibrance. And we're going to add a little bit of contrast. Okay, now what I want to do is bring out this sky. The sky was really colorful that day. And I go down to the HSL panel, and I'm going to bring the saturation of the orange up There was red over here, I remember, so I'm going to bring the red up, and I'm going to bring yellows up. I'll bring those up even a little more. I'm going to go to luminance, and I'm going to make the red a little darker. I'm going to make the orange quite a bit darker, and I'm going to make the yellow darker. Now you can see the big difference. Let me turn off this panel by hitting that switch. That's before I did these adjustments, and that's after. It just made it look a little more like I remember it when I was there. And I know this looks tropical, but it was freezing. It was really cold. And this was a really long exposure. I hit the I key on the keyboard. It was a 30-second exposure. I used an ND filter, and that smoothed out the water, made it look. And I have articles on my website about ND filters and stuff. You could check that out. Next thing is I'd like to do, for lack of a better term, dodging and burning with the brush. And what I'm going to do is, it adds interest to this like monochrome or monotone looking foreground. And I've done it in previous videos you saw me do, and I'm going to do it to this one. So typically what I do, wherever it's already dark, I make a little darker, and where it's a little light, I make it a little lighter, and that's really all I do. Now you can see these stanchions, they kind of are reflecting into the water a little bit, so I am going to do an exposure adjustment of those. I'm going to double click effect, it resets all these sliders. I'm going to bring exposure down. I'm going to have feather around 75, that's good for this, what I'm going to be doing. And I'm going to draw a line. Now I know that looks absolutely horrible, right? But don't worry about it. Don't worry about it right now. Just draw these lines. Oops, didn't want to do that. See, I made a mistake there. Hold the Alt or Option key down, and it turns into an eraser, and you could erase it. Okay. All right, now that looks pretty stupid, doesn't it? But we're going to take the exposure and just tweak it just a little bit. I mean, this is so slight. Now this takes a while to render too. Even less than that. I'm doing this also, I'm not using my Wacom tablet, which I typically do. I'm using the touchpad on my laptop to show that you could do this without a Wacom tablet. So that's it. See, now I just enhanced them a little bit. I'm at like minus 0.06, but it just did that little bit. Now we're going to do a new brush. I'm going to do a lot of brushes on this photograph. And I'm going to do another exposure adjustment, and we'll keep it high. Because we could always adjust it later. Now the right bracket key makes it bigger, the left bracket key would make this brush smaller. And I'm going to paint down in here. Like that. And we could back that off just a little bit. Now I'm going to do a new brush again. I'm going to reset everything by double clicking effect. I'm going to bring exposure up a little bit. And I'm going to make my brush a little smaller by hitting the left bracket key, and I'm going to paint down in here. Paint down in here. Now this one here, I'm going to tweak that down just a little bit. Alright, now we're going to get a new brush again. Click new. Reset it if you want by double clicking effect. I'm going to bring this up fairly high. I'm going to get a humongous brush by hitting the right bracket key. You could also adjust the size of your brush right here. Size of your feather, but size of your brush right there. Alright, bring that down a little bit, not that much. I don't know where feather was at 100. There we go. Okay, right around there, and I'm going to go right here. And I'm going to go right here. Okay, now I'm going to turn off the brushes. That's before I did all this, and that's after. This one here, maybe I'll just bring the intensity of this last brush down just a touch. Yeah, that's good. Okay, brushes are done. I'm going to do some, I'm not going to do any detail. There's no need to sharpen this photograph. There's nothing, no real detail. It's really a silhouetted pier, so I want the sky soft to begin with. So I'm going to enable the profile correction and remove chromatic aberration. Now it is slightly crooked, it's very slightly. So I'm going to click auto, and it takes a second to render, but it will straighten it out. So you get it off. You could see before. It takes a second after there. So it straightened it out. And we're going to add a vignette. Too much of a vignette? Yeah, slight vignette. So that's that. We're going to hit the backslash key. That's where we started. And that's where we ended up. I mean, that's the power of Lightroom right there. Now we go to this shot. This is just a mundane shot of a tree. This is the Niagara River over here. And this is the last one I'm going to show you. I'm just going to do things differently, a little differently. I'm still going to bring my highlights all the way down and my shadows all the way up. And I'm going to adjust the white point by holding the Alt Option key in and moving that white slider to the right till I get some whites bleeding through. And then we're going to move the blacks to the left till I get some blacks coming through. Next thing I normally do is clarity. I bring clarity up a little bit. But what if you did the other thing? If you brought clarity all the way down? Look at that. You make kind of a real cool, surreal shot. And what if you bring saturation down a little bit? And vibrance, I should say, and saturation down a little bit. It's kind of a cool look, right? So we go something different. All right, we'll try that. And let's see, should we do a contrast? Yeah, bring contrast up a little bit. Next thing I'll probably do is some brush strokes like I did on my the photograph of the pier. Is I'm going to this kind of plain looking front here. I'm going to just add some interest there. So I'm going to bring leave exposure there. I think at plus 0.55, but I'm going to make my brush smaller, and I'm going to make it a little even smaller than that. And I'm going to add like I don't know, something like that, and we're going to bring that down now to maybe 0.28. I'm going to get a new brush, and I'm going to bring exposure down this time. I'm going to bring it kind of high to begin with so I could see what I'm doing more. I'm going to make a smaller brush, and we're going to do something like this. Alright, that looks kind of ridiculous, but we're going to bring this way down now. Like that. Okay, so that's before the brush, after the brush. Just added something, you know, something to the shot. Now, done with the brush, done with the basic panel. The tone curve, I haven't done anything on tone curve, I think, at all. But I'm going to have an entire episode on this tone curve because it's so powerful, really. But what I might want to do, I don't know, you could just play with these. These sliders, what they do is they bend the part of the curve that is applicable to the highlights. And it's the same as what we did kind of in the basic panel when we adjusted the highlights, the dark, and the shadows and all that stuff. But we could add a little more contrast to the shot. We could add contrast in the basic panel too. That's why I don't do a lot with it, because we already could do these things in the basic panel. But you could add what they call the S-curve. You go down, you pull this down and this up, and it adds contrast to the shot. All right. It's simple as that. I just did that to show you that, because there's of all these videos I've never done anything with the tone curve. I'm not going to do any sharpening or anything in the detail panel because I want this soft and surreal. We will enable the profile corrections and chromatic aberration for the lens I used, and then we're going to add a vignette. And let's see if we added a white vignette. They were really popular in the 80s. I really don't care for that. Go to the right. There, still add a dark vignette. But if you like the light vignette, by all means do that. And that's it. I just wanted to show you could do things totally different. Not totally, but at least partially different than what I normally do, and make it a little more desaturated and soften it a lot, and it gives it more of a surreal, breezy feel. And that's it. I'll show you the before, there's the before, and there's the after. And that's it. So on this one, as I mentioned, I just wanted to show you 6 real quick processing or photographs that I process and how I do it and how I would do it very quickly. So look at episode 3 if you're just coming into the series now, and I develop a photograph from beginning to end and I go into more detail. The sharpening and noise reduction sliders are in episode 5. The spot removal sliders or the spot removal tools in 6. I do a portrait in 7. I do a photo in black and white in number 4. So what I'm trying to tell you is watch every single video there is, and you'll be able to learn all the little details, because I give little tidbits of detail in every one. So you could hopefully have time. You could watch them all and get the detail or the details of how I do these things and why I do these things. So anyways, I'm obviously losing my voice and I'm at a loss for words, but I really appreciate everyone watching the videos. And the response, people emailing me and stuff, it's been very nice. I really appreciate it, guys. And if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel, I'd really appreciate it. And like the videos and comment in the videos. That really helps in when people search for Lightroom training. It'll help mine show up in the training so that they could, find them. So I'd really appreciate if you could like, subscribe, and comment on the videos. And that's it. In a future episode, I will be doing the perspective corrections, and I will be doing the tone curve, and I'll be doing anything you guys want. So email me at my email address showing on the screen right now, and I will be glad to answer any questions or do a video that explains whatever you need explaining. Thanks again for watching.